Sarajevo. In the summer of 1992, Canadian soldiers came to this Yugoslavian city as peacekeepers. But in Sarajevo, there was no peace to keep. The city is descending into the hell of civil war and the longest siege in modern history. Thousands die.
The carnage was just unreal. People in Canada have no concept of what took place there.
And it was just an ongoing nightmare.
Puis là, on a vu sur les murs écrit "Welcome to hell."
Canadians are sent here to bring in aid. They do. But what's been hidden until now is that the soldiers go a lot further.
The Canadian public didn't know what we were doing. We went well beyond our rules of engagement.
Outgunned and outnumbered, the Canadians still manage to save lives. But they also confront warlords and take out snipers with deadly force.
I let go to animalistic behavior, and it felt good to kill.
I did what I had to do.
When they get home, nobody talks about what happened. And some of the soldiers pay a very high price.
It's something I've lived with for 20 years.
Now, for the first time, the key players from the generals down to the grunts tell their story. The story of Sector Sarajevo. Early 1992. Communist-led Yugoslavia is breaking apart in a series of brutal civil wars. The Yugoslav Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina is home to all the main ethnic groups: Serbs, Croats, and the majority Muslims. They all live together in the capital, Sarajevo. But now, the majority of Bosnian Muslims and Bosnian Croats want to separate from Yugoslavia. The Bosnian Serbs want to stop them. Bosnia declares independence. A civil war begins. Martin Bell is there for the BBC.
Like all civil wars, there's something about civil wars. They're peculiarly brutal because people know each other. They're slow to start, but once started, they're unstoppable.
The Bosnian Serbs hold the hills looking down on the city. They shell Sarajevo.
Ja se sjećam prvog ratnog dana, jer sam stanovao i kad je počelo bombardovanje, ja sam se strašno uplašio. I upitao sam se, Bože dragi, ako ovi ovako nastave bacati ove bombe, ja nisam imao pojma o armiji, o tom oružju, niko živ ovdje neće ostati.
Sarajevo becomes a living nightmare.
Im je pucano i jednostavno ti si navikao, mrtvi tijela je bilo svukuda. Ona je jednostavno danima ležala bez glave. Glava je bila par metara od nje u kaputu. Da li ona nije imala nikoga. Niko nije dolazio po nju, niti je neko od nju sklanju, niti doktori nije. Jednostavno je danima žena ležala ovdje, glava pored nje. Takve te neke slike, ti si bio naviknut na mrtva tijela.
The new Bosnian government wants the outside world to stop the Serbs. But no major power wants to step into a civil war. So negotiators come up with a face-saving solution. Get control of Sarajevo Airport, fly in food and medicine, and distribute them to the starving city. People will still be getting shot, but at least they won't starve. But who will volunteer to act as neutral UN peacekeepers in the middle of a civil war? A Canadian brigadier general has been working as a staff officer with the United Nations mission in Yugoslavia. His name is Louis MacKenzie. This isn't the first time General MacKenzie has worn a blue beret, keeping the peace between two sides after a war was over. But this war is just starting, and MacKenzie has never served in an active war zone before.
It's like a doctor is training to be a surgeon. I mean, and you haven't operated on anybody in 30 years, you know, the chance to actually operate on somebody. And we didn't know it was going to be as nasty as it turned out, but at least you were going to be there where there was a serious conflict going on and no ceasefire.
A Canadian battle group is doing peacekeeping duty in Croatia, next door. Lou MacKenzie goes to his boss in the UN.
You really only have one choice. You got to use the Canadians. And he said, do you think Canada would agree? And I said, well, it'll go to cabinet, but the odds are they won't unless I'm in charge. And he said, you're my chief of staff. I'm not going to let you go. And I said, well, you won't get the force, but I'll phone the CDS. I'll phone General de Chasselet and ask him. So now we get to the unethical bit. I went back to my office. I sat there. I had a cigarette. I came back in about 10 minutes later, said, well, I spoke to the chief, and there's no chance you're going to get that battalion unless I'm in charge. And he said, anyway, okay, you're in charge. Then I phoned back to Ottawa and discovered that in actual fact, they said, yeah, that's reasonable. The amazing thing was Cabinet agreed within 24 hours. There's not another country in that force of the 31 nations that would have agreed to that.
Why didn't you take the risk of phoning him first?
He might say no.
June 28th, 1992. The Canadian battle group, made up of the Royal 22nd Regiment, the famous Van Duze, and a company of the Royal Canadian Regiment, leaves Croatia to make the long drive through Bosnia-Herzegovina to Sarajevo. They know they are going into a war zone. But for some, this is what they joined up for.
We were okay with the fact that we were singled out for the mission. It was a sense of pride that we had been chosen for it. I just knew from a very young age that I was going to join the Army. That was my calling. I knew that's where I was going to end up. I wanted to be a sheepdog, yeah, to make sure that the world's sheep were taken care of from the wolves.
Yeah, I was pretty excited about it. I'd been 7 years in the Army, and all we did was train. And although it was really intense and really interesting, at the same token, you did kind of want to see where your skills stacked up.
Tout le monde était fébrile. Tout le monde qui partait, la plupart étaient contents de partir puis d'embarquer dans la mission. Comme je disais, le monde ne voulait pas vraiment rester en arrière.
We knew that going to Yugoslavia wasn't going to be just a regular peacekeeping mission. 147 peace agreements had been written and subsequently broken through bloodshed. So we knew we were going to be walking into a hot zone for sure.
The mission is supposed to last just 30 days. 1 month to open the airport and get aid flowing.
It was a bit of an adventure, just get in there. Basically, there wasn't a building that hadn't been hit by tank or rifle or machine gun fire, so, you know, we kept looking out the windows thinking, okay, we've got ourselves into a shooting war this time, so.
At first, the Canadians are greeted as heroes.
The people themselves were quite happy to see us. You know, you felt like, you know, Patton going through Rome kind of thing. You just liberated them.
Les gens étaient le long de la route avec des fleurs. Les gens nous tiraient des fleurs. Les gens tiraient des fleurs, c'était vraiment émouvant. Mais dans notre tête, on se disait, ils en attendent peut-être beaucoup plus de nous autres que ce que c'est qu'on va pouvoir faire vraiment, là.
In the back of your mind, you knew that, you know, these people think we're here to fight for them, and we're not.
We had to go through a lot of checkpoints. The problem was that after about noon, they were all drunk. And so as they got drunk, they got more belligerent.
These guys were fighting on a mix of cocaine and alcohol. Food wasn't a concern of theirs. If you were stopped in a fortified village, most of the soldiers were asking you for medication, but you took that to mean they were looking for cocaine.
Cocaine?
Mm-hmm. If you've ever been a bouncer in a bar, cocaine and alcohol make you do brutal things. You see people who don't care about what they do.
We got stopped not too far out of Sarajevo by one of these warlords.
What kind of weapons did this drunken warlord have?
He had everything from AK-47s right through to M84 main battle tanks.
Oh, he had tanks?
He had tanks.
On a essayé de négocier, mais il était complètement ivre, puis même il a menacé ses soldats pendant qu'il était là. Mais pendant qu'on a négocié, puis on a négocié une bonne demi-heure, 45 minutes, lui, il avait ses gardes du corps. Puis des gros bonhommes, là, armés, puis pointaient leur arme dans ma direction. Puis tout tranquillement, mon capitaine de bataille, Guy Bellil, mon chauffeur, le caporal-chef Cyr, ils viennent aux deux coins de la petite cabane de 8 pieds par 10. Puis là, mon chauffeur, il avait un M72, puis il était ouvert. Un M72, c'était une arme anti-char légère. Il était ouvert sur son dos. Puis mon capitaine de bataille, puis mon chauffeur, puis là, je les vois, puis là, je suis en train de négocier, puis je regarde ça, puis je dis, hey, c'est pas pire. Et puis, tranquillement, ils lèvent leur arme, puis ils pointent ça sur les gardes du corps du chef serbe. Puis les gardes du corps, eux autres, ont baissé leur arme.
The battle group arrives in Sarajevo on July 2nd. There is incoming fire and bodies everywhere.
When we first moved into Sarajevo, I was shocked. One of the most beautiful cities in the world had been turned into one of the biggest cesspools. It was devastating. It would be like taking a city like Vancouver or Montreal or Halifax and turning them upside down and then shaking them upside down. The city was completely under siege at this point, with reports of 2,500 to 3,000 artillery and mortar rounds being fired into the city on a daily basis.
Canadian soldiers arrive in Sarajevo with this fighting all around them, and it's disturbing. Sarajevo was a beat-up city, tremendous amount of destruction, tremendous destruction, and fighting was ongoing all around us, night and day, fighting. It was a new thing for Canadian soldiers to arrive and see and be exposed to and be shot at for the very first time. Frightening.
Puis là, on a vu sur les murs écrit Welcome to Hell. Bienvenue en enfer.
In Sarajevo, anyone can be a target. Apartments in high-rises are sniper positions. For the Canadians, it's confusing and shocking.
The carnage was just unreal, unreal. People in Canada have no concept of what took place there. On the first day actually coming into Sarajevo, I witnessed a pregnant woman being shot. I was within minutes of driving through the city gates. She was wearing a long dress, and she was on the other side of a large open area. And I just happened to look over in my usual way of scanning the surroundings, and they shot her right in the stomach. And down she went. welcome to Sarajevo.
Canadian peacekeepers have been sent into the middle of Bosnia's civil war. Now the soldiers take control of Sarajevo Airport. The first objective is to secure it so that planes can fly in. But it is under fire from all sides.
We got to the airport, and you were trying to make sense of who was shooting at who, or why they would even be shooting at each other. I mean, none of it really seemed to make any sense. The overall mission was to ensure that food and medication were being brought into the city, and we were there to oversee it and to keep the airport open.
Well, I'm a Canadian. When you take something over, you run up a flag. So we had 2 or 3 of the French Marine commandos on each side, and we had the flagpole and the UN flag, and it was being put up, and Butmir and Dombrina were firing at the UN flag as it was going up.
The airport is right in the crossfire between Serb and Bosnian government towns.
Within about 3 or 4 hours, you couldn't see the sun for all the dirt that was flying, as all these guys are digging in and all the vehicles are digging in. There were about 30 tanks about less than a half a kilometer away in the Serbian camp. There were artillery pieces there. There were artillery all around the hills around them. And if the Serbs in particular had turned on us, they were in a position to at least defend themselves. Not enough, but we sure would have gone down fighting.
Sarajevo itself was sort of in a U-shaped sort of pocket surrounded by mountains. And when we arrived, the Serbs held all the mountains surrounding the city. Sarajevo Airport sat sort of on a plain to the southwest of the city of Sarajevo.
The Serbs are at both ends of the runway. And just beside the airport are Dobrinja and Butmir, 2 Bosnian government suburbs. So there's fighting around the airport most of the time. UN headquarters is in a former telephone company building called the PTT. It, too, is right in the line of fire.
We basically commandeered what would have been an office suite. I believe it was like the 7th floor. They had a glass stairway that went up to our floor, which you avoided like the plague if you could, because you always heard bullets going through the glass. The air was literally full of bullets, and you're 7 floors in the air. Constantly, we'd be listening to the glass falling out there, and you could hear the snap of bullets going right through this stairway. But it was the only way to get up there. We took a lot of fire. I took fire every day.
The Canadian battle group is only a few hundred lightly armed men who are supposed to be neutral and never take sides. But they are called UNPROFOR, United Nations Protection Force. That raises expectations in Sarajevo that MacKenzie and the Canadians cannot meet.
I'm really angry because he didn't do nothing. I understand that he's a commander of peacekeeping, he's not peacemaking forces, but peace doesn't exist in this territory. What he doing here?
There was a lot of misconception within the Bosnian and Serb and Croatian ranks that we were there to assist the other side. So the Serbs thought we were there to help the Bosnians thought we were there to help the Serbs. Nobody really understood what we were doing there except for us.
But with the airport open, planes with aid begin to arrive. This will become the longest humanitarian airlift in history.
Je me souviens bien, il y avait un avion qui atterrissait aux 15 minutes. De l'aide humanitaire, c'est de la nourriture. Il y avait des rations de combat. Il Il y avait aussi beaucoup de médicaments, tout ce qui s'appelle pour le soin de la population.
Flying into Sarajevo is a dangerous business.
There was numerous times when I was on the airfield watching the aid planes come in from whatever contingent. They'd come in and they'd get strafed with automatic fire from the hills and from either one of the residential areas just off the airport, Dobrinja or Butmir. They'd receive flak all the time. It was definitely a crazy thing for the locals to shoot at the planes because they were bringing aid into their city. Like, it just didn't make any sense, other than maybe there was the thoughts that they were going to use that against them. They were going to supply the other side. But just foolish shots, totally.
There's a risk in becoming more embroiled, but witness what's coming off the back of the aircraft, and you have to accept a certain degree of risk to help the population in Sarajevo. Very early on, within 48 hours, I had to order the creation of teams of the local aid agencies, Bosnian, Serb, Muslim, our civilian police, led, thank God, by the RCMP. As each flight came in, as each bit of equipment was unloaded, they inspected it. Because immediately we knew we were going to get accusation of smuggling arms into one side or the other, which happened just like that.
Flying in the food and medicine is one thing. Getting it into the city is another. The drivers are civilians, but when some get shot, the rest refuse to drive. So the Canadians take over the driving.
Driving in Sarajevo was crazy. You had to be switched on all the time to make sure you were going to be able to traverse that city without getting killed. It was a constant battle every day.
There was machine gun fire just raging down that road. But because I was in the armored vehicle with my headset on, I couldn't hear the fire. Apparently, I drove for about 100 meters, turned right again, and I must have gone through a couple of thousand rounds, which flew right past us.
You never really did know which side was shooting at you. I mean, you were in a gigantic armored vehicle. It's 13 tons of armor. It's got this really loud exhaust, and to be able to tell that you even got hit by small arms fire was almost impossible.
A peacekeeping mission means working under United Nations rules that were never designed for an active war zone, even when the soldiers are dodging bullets.
The UN mandate for returning fire is crystal clear. They say that you can only fire when fired upon, or if you witness civilians or your own equipment being engaged. So unless the rounds were, say, within arm's reach, it wasn't considered effective fire. If you actually got hit, that was really effective fire.
We weren't to have loaded rifles. We were to have an empty magazine on the rifle, so as a visible deterrent. I will say not one of us went anywhere without a loaded weapon. Nobody followed those rules. They were asinine.
Because the rules will get you killed.
The rules would get you killed.
The Canadians have opened an airport in the middle of a civil war. Now the Blue Helmets bring food to the desperate Sarajevans under siege.
Pa mislim da bi mi svi pokrepali, a ne pomrli, već pokrepali, da nije bilo tog zračnog mosta I te pomoći. mi nismo imali zaliha u gradu da bi mogli preživjeti. Znači, ta pomoć je bila sudbonosna. Da nje nije bilo, mi bi se sami međusobno poubijali za komad kruha, poubijali nas oni odozgo s brda i pokrepali od gladi.
But often, aid is stolen and resold for profit.
Jedan dio stanovništva, na primjer, koji nije, kako da kažem, nije ga interesovao ni rat, gledao je kroz rat da dođe do svog profita.
So I went to the High Commissioner for Refugees and said, you know, we're risking people's lives down here, and it looks like a lot of this stuff is going to the black market or the Bosnian Muslim militia, the soldiers who are fighting to defend the city. And she said, any idea? And I said, well, it was 60, 70%. She said, that's not bad. There's nothing unique about that. Yeah.
The Canadians defend the aid when they can. Scott Casey is escorting a convoy from the airport when 4 armed men try to hijack it.
And as we came up to their position, one of them put his hand in the air for us to stop. And we were not going to stop. So he leveled his AK-47 at our APCs and our convoy. And that was a bad mistake for him. The crew commander of the lead APC opened up with the 50 cal and cut him in half, and then shot us, the second man. The lead APC drove over the body, and then I was right behind him, drove over the body of that first fellow that lowered his rifle. So we took care of business.
When the aid planes start taking a lot of fire, Lou MacKenzie has to halt the flights.
We were starting to bring in maybe 25 aircraft a day, so it was a significant amount of food and medicine. But the fact was, we were stopping the operation. If we could get a ceasefire, then we can have normal airport operations. I don't know how many ceasefires I brokered, but it's certainly in double digits. And, you know, none of them ever lasted more than 48 hours. The problem was the Bosnian government was very proud of its new membership of the United Nations, and they didn't want to risk their credibility by dealing with a faction on the other side, the Bosnian Serbs. So it's a little hard to have a meaningful ceasefire.
I mean, I remember one of the ceasefires. They almost as soon as it was signed at the airport, we had almost daily ceasefires, and then the shooting started, and the negotiators then were hiding from the fire under the table in which they'd signed the ceasefire. It was crazy.
When a ceasefire fails, the Bosnian Serbs fire into Bosnian government neighborhoods. MacKenzie and the UN often get the blame.
Čisto sumnjam, ako budemo na to čekali, od toga neće ništa biti. Malo smo razočarani na ovo UNPROFOR-a. Zašto jedanput se nestane tome u kraj, ako se može stati, ako ne može, onda da se dane u javnost, da nisu oni sposobni to da urade.
What the Bosnian government side wants is armed intervention by the world to stop the Serbs attacking Sarajevo. The peacekeepers can't do that, but they try to help in other ways. A Serb sniper in a high-rise has pinned down some civilians.
A kako sam ranjena, da vam kažem. Ispred Filozofskog fakulteta su nas naši vojnici zaustavili, jer sa Grbavice snajpersta je gađao. I on, kako su nas vikali da stanemo, mladić je stao s kolima. Ja sam istrčala iz kola, pošto sam na prvom mjestu bila, Kedi je bio. Mene je već snajpersta bio uhvatio kad sam izlazila iz kola. tako u glavu, ali je metak otišao u plečku i da iznet izašao na debelo meso. Kaže, ovi sad vojnici viču, gospođo, ne mičite se, jer će vidjeti da ste živi, pa će vas ponovo gađati. I ja sam tako zamrla tu.
As Ida Kekic lies wounded and helpless, two soldiers of the Van Duze stop their armored vehicle. Captain Guy Belil and Sergeant Mario Foray.
J'ai crié au capitaine Belil, j'ai dit « Couvrez-moi, capitaine, j'y vais. » Fait que je suis descendu sur la rampe, à genoux, à quatre pattes. Je suis arrivé à côté la première personne. Lui, il était mort. Il y avait une mort de sang. Fait que là, je suis arrivé à la première femme. Je pense que c'était Madame Kekic. Puis elle était assez imposante.
Sam ja na otvoreno. Su bila one velike, dva kestena, ona velika, posjekli su, ja mislim. I on se malo mogu skloniti od tog kestena, ali nije.
À ce moment-là, il y avait encore des échanges de coups de feu. On entendait des bonnes déflagrations, là. Mais je me tenais vraiment en bas, là. Je m'étais scratché les bras, là. Puis j'avais du sang après moi, mais c'était le sang des personnes qui étaient par terre. Elle était en état de panique, puis c'est sûr qu'elle se lèverait pas là, pour s'en venir vers le véhicule. Fait que j'ai commencé à tirer sur les bras, puis c'est à ce moment-là qu'il y a un Bosniaque qui est venu m'aider. Puis on a réussi à la tirer, la rentrer dans le véhicule.
Foray manages to get Ida Kekic to hospital.
I željela bi da mu se zahvali. Ja sam mislila da će on biti, pa da ga poljubim kad mi je spasio život, stvarno.
But not everybody is complimentary, as Martin Bell reports.
It's a dirty war, and the UN troops, because they left the civilian bodies behind, do not get due credit for their valor.
They want to take our people out, I know. If there would be Serbs lying there, they would do it.
What was most disturbing is roundly condemned by the people in the area for not going back and removing the cadavers. As none of the locals were making an effort to do anything, these Canadians were blamed for just rescuing the wounded rather than going back and risking their lives until the fight was over to drag the cadavers off.
But soon, the hostility to the mission will get a lot worse. The siege of Sarajevo is getting worse, and Canadian peacekeepers are under daily fire. Now their commander, MacKenzie, begins to get death threats. The government side, the majority Bosnian Muslims, claims the Serbs are threatening his life. The Serbs claim the same for the Bosnian side.
The intelligence guy for the Bosnian Muslims said, "We have some disturbing intercept for you." So I go over and listen to it, and it's allegedly the Serbs talking about burn him, burn him, burn him to death. Somehow they found out that the way I didn't want to die in life was to be burnt to death. I get back to my headquarters, and the Serbs want to speak to me. So I go and sit down with them. And it's allegedly Bosnian Muslim intercepts. We want to burn them, burn them, burn them. I mean, it was just this stupid friggin' game going on.
Under threat from both sides, MacKenzie gets a visitor from Ottawa, his superior, General John de Chastelain.
I wanted to see for myself what was going on. I wanted to judge how Lou was. He'd been put under enormous pressure by by very difficult events. His life had been threatened, as you know. And I wanted the soldiers to know that we were there to find out what was happening and to get from them what we needed to know in terms of supporting them.
But MacKenzie confides that his biggest worry is that his own personal unpopularity is threatening his soldiers.
And for good reason, because my troops, my frankness, I guess, had made me so unpopular with the Bosnian side that my soldiers are now being threatened in my name. It wasn't you're a soldier with UNPROFOR, you're a MacKenzie, you work for MacKenzie. And the last thing I would want to see are people being killed in my name.
The first night I was there, there was constant fire going on outside. Small arms fire, machine gun fire, occasionally rocket-propelled grenade fire. And eventually I got out of the bed and slept under the bed on the floor. The next morning, a corporal with the man dude brought me a cup of coffee and said, how'd you sleep? And I was about to say, not terribly well with all that noise going on, but I didn't. I said, okay, how about you? He said, first quiet night we've had in weeks.
The next day will turn out to be one of the most traumatic of the mission. One of the kids who lives in the mixed neighborhood nearby is a 16-year-old Bosnian Serb called Dragana Perisic.
I onda ona rekla, bacaju bombone, čula je UNPROFORci. I onda smo otišle do 5 eta i usput smo, kako smo sišli pješke do Afaze, tu je bio od moje sestre Slađane njen prvi momak musliman, mislim da se zvao Elvir. Pitali smo njega da li on hoće da ide, on je poveo brata, tako da se već stvorila grupa nas djeci.
We often had kids that came to the PTT building. They were more or less looking for food and a little bit of safety, I think, because when you're out in a neighborhood, you're a fair target. But if you're around a UN building, I guess they saw that as a safer place to be, although we got shelled quite a bit too in the building.
And I'm on the second floor of my headquarters building looking through bulletproof glass down to the front of the building. 3 of my officers were passing chocolate bars through openings on the side of the building. I was looking at one girl in particular, tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, looked up at me, a little emaciated, but other than that, she reminded me of my daughter.
Na svakom prozoru bili su ti vojnici koji su onako nonšalantno bacali. I baci ovdje, ti potrčiš tamo, oni bace tamo, ti potrčiš tamo i onako raštrkani, da što više ufatiš, da možda i kući poneseš.
I happened to see that there was one little girl, and she kept getting shoved out of the way by these bigger kids. So I told my buddies to go down to the next window, you know, kind of drag the crowd with them, and as they did that, I called the little girl back, and she did. She came back, and I threw out a bag of chocolate-covered raisins or something to her. And so as it fell to the ground, she ran forward to pick it up. And she knelt down, she picked it up, and she looked up at me and blew me a kiss.
And suddenly the whole building rocked and a whole stomp of 4 or 5 mortar bombs came in.
The mortar bomb, it was a big one. Went by me and landed right in the middle of these kids. 2 of them disappeared. I mean, we're talking, the shrapnel just tears the body apart. The girl I was looking at was decapitated, blown back out in the street.
Nije samo jedna granata pala, nego je tu bila kanonada. To je sve bilo u ti metar, 2, druga, treća. Ti imaš osjećaj da nikad neće prestati. Ja sam počela da gubim svijest. Kasnije sam saznala da sam puno teško ranjena. Mislila sam da umiram, ali pomislila sam neću da umrem. Tak mi je 16 godina.
We all rolled out of our bunks, ran for the basement, which was our drill. And we got down there, we did a head count, we realized Greg was missing. And he'd actually looked down when the rounds hit and saw the kids blown to bits, and instead of going to the basement where we were supposed to go, he ran outside. Our warrant officer ran out after him, and they tried matching up arms and legs with, bodies, and it was pretty much a nightmare.
Kada smo došli u bolnicu i neko je rekao uzet ćemo nju, ona je kao hitna, kao da je sva. I onda je doktor prišao i rekao ništa od nje, ona je gotova. Ja sam tada rekla, dala sam znak. Onda on rekao, živa, još nije kao mrtva. I onda su rekla, ona je hitno, nju ćemo prvo da uradimo. Ja tad nisam znala da mi je sestra poginula i njen momak poginuo.
It's something I've lived with for 20 years.
There have been plenty of examples of Serbs firing on civilians, but some of the Canadian soldiers believe that this time it was militia on the Bosnian government side firing on civilians.
What they were trying to do was create outrage. I mean, they didn't want their own side to be caught doing this. They wanted it to look like a Serb onslaught. They wanted it to look like the Serbs had massacred another group of civilians for no reason.
Ne znam, to je monstruozno. Da neko tako razmišlja, da će neko sad uzeti, eto kažem, neko iz Sarajeva da puca na svoje. To je gotovo nemoguće.
I mean, not all soldiers are perfect witnesses, not all journalists are perfect witnesses. All I can tell you is what I know. I never saw evidence, and I was certainly present at a lot of the massacres to substantiate that, ever.
The guns keep firing, and the Canadians can't stop them. But now, they will finally get to take action and put a stop to some of the carnage. Sarajevo is a town of high-rises. In a war, any window can hide a sniper. And Serb positions in the hills give them clear shots into the streets of the city. It's a very personal kind of war.
En temps de guerre, qui tire la population comme ça, c'est pour semer la terreur.
Po ulicama se nije moglo kretati, pucao je snajper stalno. I to je stvarno bilo jako teška situacija.
Just crossing the street can get you killed.
Jer si otvorena meta bio. Civili, djeca, žene.
The snipers have free rein, and the Canadians are merely witnesses.
There was a woman with 2 children carrying makeshift water containers. All of a sudden, the little boy just fell. And I was watching, then I realized he'd been shot. And the mother turned because she heard her boy scream. And she went back, and she was shot too. And she fell on top of him. I was just distraught. Put my helmet on and my rifle, and I just had to get out of there. So I did. I just went for a walk across the airfield. I didn't even care if I got shot at that point.
The Canadians aren't supposed to shoot back unless they're fired on. Under UN rules, it's called a Chapter 6 mission. You can't use force. MacKenzie doesn't have the authority to change that, but he does anyway.
I rewrote the rules. As my soldiers referred to it, I changed it to 6.5. Under Chapter 6, if you are threatened yourself, you can defend yourself. If your buddy beside you is threatened, then you're not supposed to get involved. But in 6.5, I said if the mission's threatened, if the planes are being interfered with coming in, if anybody's being shot at, if the mission is being put at risk, you can use deadly force. And Canadians were able to do that better than anybody else.
We were on a patrol one day. I was actually in the back of an APC manning the C6 machine gun. There was a target that was firing down on our convoy, and I brought the C6 to bear on him, and I unloaded, probably 60 rounds into the window he was standing in. It was one of those moments where I let go to, I guess, animalistic behavior, and it felt good to kill. And, it's not a good place to be, but it happens.
The Canadian public didn't know what we were doing. They didn't know that we had very little ammunition. They didn't know that General MacKenzie, to protect his own troops, were bringing in high explosive mortar rounds and tow missiles. They didn't know that our guys were taking off their blue berets at night, putting on camouflage paint and sneaking out in the dark, trying to track down where the Bosnian Muslims and the Serbs were hiding mortar plates close to UN bases. We went well beyond our rules of engagement.
The Bosnian government forces have put a base plate, a firing position for mortars, near the Canadian camp to fire at the Serbs. But the Serbs fire back at the town and the Canadians. MacKenzie goes to the Bosnian government and warns them to move the mortars.
And so these guns are going to fire, the Serbs are going to fire back, my troops are going to be hit. So if these guns aren't removed, and I forget the time frame I gave them, it was a couple of hours at least, they will be killed by my people, and stormed out of the office.
Peter Devlin orders a patrol to take out the mortar.
I believe that the right thing to do was to eliminate that particular threat. There was no more indirect fire from that base plate position after the patrol came back.
They never did have to kill any of them?
I don't know. Don't particularly care. They moved.
But the most secret way they stretch the rules is counter-sniping. Greg Alkerton is a trained sniper with the recce platoon.
Ambulance crew and mechanics had been fired on. Injuries had occurred. So they put us on top of the roof, and we had all of our equipment up there, and we had narrowed it down to a building that was under construction up on the ridge line to the south of us, and I spent a lot of nights up there waiting and seeing nothing. There was a person who showed up at one point, and without getting too graphic, I left the roof that night knowing that this person was about to take out a UN soldier. I did what I had to do. Basically, I went through taking that shot, the 4 rules of aim. You're just basically making sure your position is stable. Your sights are lined up with the target correctly. Your breathing is proper and your trigger pull's even. It's a non-thought process until it's over. The target was somewhat obscured by distance, but I mean, I had no trouble telling what his intentions were. He was basically standing on the porch of this building and pointing his rifle down into our maintenance area, and he looked like he was ready to take up the pull on his trigger, so.
You pulled first.
That's right. It's hard to explain how I felt afterwards. I just felt like something different was about to take place in my life, but I wasn't sure what.
Then, the tensions between the Canadian Blue Helmets and the Sarajevan defenders reach a tipping point. On July 20th, 1992, suspicions that the Canadians are favoring the Serbs come to a head. and very nearly destroy the mission. A convoy of reconnaissance soldiers prepares to set out in the afternoon for a Serb neighborhood on the edge of Sarajevo.
We got given a warning order for a mission. They were planning to open an aid route in the city. They wanted to go through a Bosnian Muslim neighborhood, cross no man's land, and then get into Serbian lines that way.
We were trying to open up a distribution site on the Serbian side. And so it was important for us to have a distribution center on the Serbian side. So we were going there to deliver aid and to make the arrangements to be able to deliver goodness to the Serbs.
Some on the government side don't see it that way. The convoy heads for the Serb neighborhood. It's right on the front line.
So as we pulled into the Bosnian Defense Force checkpoint, it was sort of like a very narrow boulevard. It was kind of like you were boxed in because there's all these office buildings to your left and right. You really had no place that you could get off of this road. So we pulled up to their checkpoint and they halted us.
Their exit route is blocked. The soldiers are trapped.
And we thought, okay, there's something wrong here. And all of a sudden, a bunch of Bosnian Muslims, probably about 25, ran out, including one guy we called the gunslinger because he was wearing a black coverall and he had a chrome-plated .38 revolver on his hip. And he was drunk as a skunk and he wanted to know what we were doing there, and no one told him we were coming. More and more Bosnian Muslim troops started to come in. And then the gunslinger started yelling at his troops, who started getting a lot more nervous and getting their weapons up at the ready. And he came over to my vehicle and he said he wanted to look inside. And I wasn't too sure about that because while we're in our vehicle, it's like a little armored bunker. But if I opened the back door so we could look in, then it would be very easy to just throw a grenade in or shoot inside.
They show the commander that there are no hidden weapons in the vehicles, but the militia leader still thinks the Canadians are smuggling arms to the Serbs.
So after a lot of arguing at the back of our vehicle, at one point, this commander basically looked at one of his younger lieutenants and said, "Kill them," and walked away.
Lou MacKenzie rushes downtown to see the president of Bosnia. He has to settle for an underling.
Didn't want to go to the scene. He tried to make excuses, but I said, come on, let's go. You know, your people are accusing me, my soldiers, of smuggling ammunition, Yugoslavian ammunition, to the Serbs.
The official does nothing. The militia commander orders the Canadians to turn over their weapons.
I remember Major Devlin kind of going around. He went to every vehicle and he canvassed everybody. And he said, it looks really bad, guys. They want us to either turn over our weapons or they're gonna kill us. So I guess the choices are, I'll leave it up to you guys. Nobody's gonna think anything the worse of you, but do you want to give up and live or fight and die?
The men choose to stand their ground. Desperate, MacKenzie calls the United Nations in New York to put pressure on the Bosnian leaders. But at the UN, it's not a good idea to call outside of office hours.
I mean, this one guy I talked to when I phoned the UN didn't even know that Sarajevo was in Yugoslavia or Bosnia-Herzegovina. He asked me where I was, you know. He said, which mission are you with? I said, UNPROFOR. And he said, which country is that in? You know, former Yugoslavia, and where are you? I'm in Sarajevo. And what do you do? You know, bang. I ended up hanging up on him.
Jim Davis goes from vehicle to vehicle.
I just told all the guys, they got their grenades ready. We had our M72s. So I started designating targets for all of our guys, who they were going to shoot first.
Jim said, you know, boys, pick a target, pick somebody you want to take with you, basically. That's the way we were looking at it at the time. I had a picture of my daughter and an ultrasound picture of my son who was on the way. I took them out of my wallet. I put them right on the vehicle deck in front of me. I figured if I was going to fight it out, have some pictures, some family around, I don't know. I remember apologizing that I'm not going to be there for you guys, kind of thing. So it was that serious of a situation.
A UN reconnaissance patrol of 24 men was today held up at gunpoint by Bosnian forces who demanded that the UN troops hand over their weapons.
The BBC's Martin Bell is about to report on the standoff. MacKenzie takes his videotape and manages to get to the president of Bosnia and threaten him.
This is going to be a really, really big story, and you're going to be on the wrong end of it. And the media is going to take this. You're threatening to kill, you know, UN soldiers, bringing humanitarian aid to the other side.
MacKenzie's tough talk works. The president sends his men to force the militia to back down.
One of his guys with a Canadian major talked to the gunslinger, told him, you got to pull your guys back and let these guys go. And eventually he did, and we pulled out. MacKenzie saved us all.
The soldiers have done what peacekeepers are meant to do. They have stood their ground without firing. They have prevented a disaster. Using the media helped Lou MacKenzie, but the next day, it's his undoing.
My low point happened at an international press conference down at the presidency, the Bosnian presidency. And I was working with an interpreter on my right. And they were asking me about, an English reporter asked me about a ceasefire. And I said, ceasefire, you know?
We have evidence that both sides shelled themselves in order to create a particular image. I got so frustrated at this a month ago, I said to both leaders, if you'll stop shelling yourselves, maybe we'll have peace around here.
That went international. And the UN phoned Namibia and said, I think maybe you better recall MacKenzie and have a chat with him.
What MacKenzie has said is too much for the United Nations. He is removed from his command. The Canadian mission in Sarajevo is due to end anyway, but not like this. Although the siege rages on, the Canadian mission to Sarajevo has come to an end. Other UN personnel will now continue the work the Canadians began.
We got the orders that we were going to be moving out of Sarajevo. The mission was ending. There was a multitude of questions going on as we're leaving, and one of them was, had we done a good job, so good that now we can leave? You know, the people are okay? Or was this just a show for the international community? Because if you're starving, it's not going to be over in 1 month, especially with the siege that was going on. So there's lots of questions. So a very confusing time. Also elation to get the hell out of there.
I sent a couple of guys downtown to the black market to find some alcohol, and they brought it back, and we had a little party at the headquarters till about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It only started probably at midnight, and then I got up a couple hours later and waited for the last vehicle to leave the airport, and stopped it and shook everybody's hand, and off they went.
I wanted the opportunity to tell you all just how proud I am of every bloody one of you and the magnificent job you've done. And it's never made me feel more proud as a soldier in our Army. Thank you very much for making my last command appointment, real command in the Army, by far the most memorable. And I hope we have a reunion sometime in the future. It'll be one hell of a piss-up somewhere, right?
We sort of felt like we were abandoning this mission. I really didn't want to leave. I remember leaving the neighborhood where the PTT was located and just seeing the burning buildings all around it and just feeling terrible about the situation. I was clearly upset, I mean, to the point where I was in tears on several occasions. I'm pretty sure out of everyone in our convoy, I mean, there was probably not one person who didn't have tears coming down his face. Whether it was just pure relief to have gotten out of there alive, whether it was out of sorrow for the people that were left there, I can't answer to that, but I just know a lot of us had very emotional feelings about leaving.
Sarajevo's nightmare went on for another 3 years. Finally, in 1995, NATO committed to destroying Bosnian Serb forces, and the siege was lifted. Bosnian Serbs and the Bosnian government side agreed to a peace plan. The fighting finally stopped.
Was it worth it, the mission?
Peace has kind of come to that region, so I'd like to think we helped a little bit. Soldiers are soldiers for a reason, you know, we have a job to do, and if someone gives us a mission and says, go out there and, you know, stop that fighting, you know, protect the innocent, then that's what we're paid to do. So from that perspective, yeah, it was worth it. In the grand scheme of things, I guess we helped some, but really, those people had to solve their own problems. I'm not sure that the UN mission, as it was written, as it was designed, and as it was carried out, you know, contributed all that much. You know, those various ethnic groups had to find their own solution, ultimately.
I think, looking back on it, I've always thought that a more robust intervention was possible. Lou MacKenzie at that time had very limited manpower available to him. He did the best he could with what he had. But he didn't have a real fighting force at all. It was smoke and mirrors, as I'm sure he would be the first to admit.
You know, the Canadian mission in Sarajevo during that 1 month that they were there had an objective. And that objective was to bring food and medicine on a constant supply into the airport and to deliver it to distribution points downtown. And quite frankly, based on the force available at the time within UNPROFOR, nobody else could have done it. They had the equipment, they had the leadership, they had the manpower, they had the talent, and I've never been prouder to be a Canadian and see the way they operated.
But many of those soldiers paid a hidden price, one they felt they weren't supposed to talk about.
In the years that followed, I took my retirement from the military, and literally my life fell to pieces. I kind of feel like I gave up everything because I did lose everything. I lost my family. I became homeless for a while. I pretty much became hopeless for a while. I would self-medicate quite regularly, and I couldn't cope with what I had seen.
That's what it was?
Mm-hmm. It was horrible. I mean, to go to bed sober, I would see the little girl's face that died in Sarajevo. I would see thousands of, you know, sad, disheveled people who I couldn't help. And it was just an ongoing nightmare.
Since our tour ended, in the years after that, I've lost quite a few friends through suicide. Many of them have taken their own lives. In fact, just as recently as a few days ago, one of the guys from our tour ended his life, tragically. Yeah.
A ti UNPROFORci to sve na neki način gledali i nisu imali pravo ništa da oni spriječi, već oni su samo bili svjedoci. Tako da su i ti vojnici, po mom mišljenju, bili mučenici. I oni su to preživjeli veoma teško.
What's your feeling looking back at that teenage boy who wanted to be a soldier, wanted to be a sheepdog guarding his flock?
Did I fulfill the sheepdog persona that I was looking for? Yeah, I did. Yeah. It may not have been a long time thing, but I held the wolf away for some time while I was there, and I didn't let him bite me, and I did my best to keep him from biting the sheep. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Thank you.